I thought I could ask everyone where they're where they're from, but there's just too many people now. Like 20 people, like, so one by one.
I was just thinking that exact same thing. Sorry, I will just do my intro bit while I'm talking, which is that I haven't actually ever run a webinar before, so please forgive me if I do things like can't actually find out where the tab is that I'm working from. Where's it gone? Ah. What? I just closed it. Sorry, everybody, 1 second.
Meanwhile, some people in the chat are suggesting we can all just say hello in the text chat and say here we are.
Yeah,
so that is happening.
Great. Yeah. So Finn, we know. I think we roughly. Oh, I know where you're from. I think we've met before, haven't we?
Indeed. Yeah, I'm Finn, ATOLYE Collective, Oxford, web developers, and good to see so many faces.
Yeah, this is really exciting. Let's see.
Great. Can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Start at the beginning. Okay. So yeah, thank you all for taking the time from your busy Monday afternoons to come to our webinar. It's really nice to see so many familiar faces and also some new ones. And as Maddie says, I guess usually we'd quite like to start by going around, but seeing as there's quite a few people here, please use the chat function to introduce yourselves, and hopefully at the end we can have a bit more time for discussion. And also, you know, we're always around for you to stay in touch with, like follow us on social media or just drop us an email if you want to hear more about what we do. So yeah, my name's Polly, as you probably know by now. I have worked for some years now doing various things to do with buildings. So I started off mainly renovating like an old dirty factory in Berlin and turning it into like a groovy event space, which was kind of, I came across by accident, but then came back to London and worked with quite a big charity on a project which was worth about 4 million. Kind of renovating a central London office and getting everyone to move into that. I spent 2 years running an organisation called Ugly Duck, which is a really great organisation which is still running, which I would highly recommend you check out. They take over buildings between them being bought and sold and fill them up with like all sorts of interesting events, mainly looking at sort of subsidising artists for rehearsal and exhibition space. But charging like people who've got lots of money, plenty of money to do films and corporate events so that they can make the financial model work. And yeah, I've just generally been really quite interested in sort of urbanism for quite a long time. And I spent a year in Lisbon working with the co-working space out there and looking at kind of the role of co-working cultural regeneration. But came back to London about 3 years ago with the specific aim of setting up Space 4, which is a subsidiary of Outlandish. So both Maddie and I work for Outlandish, which is a workers' cooperative, and Outlandish mainly builds websites for good causes. So we work with a lot of quite large NGOs, trade unions or sort of progressive companies, and mainly build data-driven websites. But yeah, in July 2017, the office downstairs from Outlandish's HQ became vacant. And so Outlandish called me up and said, would I be up for opening a co-working space? The idea initially was basically to try and support the cooperative movement. For those of you who don't know what cooperatives are, they are there's quite a few different definitions of cooperatives, but we are organisations who are run, owned and controlled by our workers, and we have direct control of all shares and profits. And there are many different, as I say, definitions of co-ops, and we can also talk to you at more length at the end if you'd like to do that. So yeah, so initially the space was just quite short term. I think we had a 1-year contract initially. and it was about 200 square meters. And I thought some of you who might be thinking about setting up co-working spaces might be interested to think a bit more about the finances. And again, if anyone's interested in getting into more detail, I can do, but we spent about 15k on the first building, which was basically repainting it, getting an artist in to do some more like kind of light touch effects and getting secondhand furniture. So we really did that on pretty much as much of a shoestring as you can get away with. And then we ran at a loss. So basically the space wasn't full for the first 9 months or so, which meant that we were running, you know, at a loss, but it's okay because for us it was an investment. It's a way that Outlandish wanted to invest some of its surplus in order to create social value. After about 9 months, we partnered up with Founders and Coders, who are another sort of cooperatively run organisation. And what they do is they teach people how to become web developers, and they've got at any one time sort of 16 to 20 students full time. And I'd say this was like a real turning point for us. It was a way that we could get financial stability because they could pay a fairly decent chunk of the rent, and it meant that we could, I think it really underlined everything that we were doing regarding social value, because although most of the people who were in the space previously were all working on kind of digital tech projects, Founders and Coders had much more of an emphasis on outreach and community work and public workshops. And so, yeah, I would say that if we're thinking of kind of top tips to take away from this webinar, for me, that having this partnership with an established organisation who have a very clear public outreach goal and a very clear social value aim, which everybody, you know, it doesn't take much understanding when you're thinking about, you know, training up people to get well-paid jobs in, you know, social technology. It's pretty easy for anyone to understand the benefits of that. And yeah, having that partnership's been a real godsend. Last summer, we won a contract with Islington Council, and we are now one of their first affordable workspace providers. So we've now moved into a slightly bigger and better premises up the road. So we're still in the same neighbourhood, but now we've got a 10-year contract. So, you know, so I suppose what I wanted to say is, like, for us, this has been, you know, it's pretty amazing. We started out something on a bit of a wing and a prayer with quite a short-term contract, and now it's grown into something which the council has put faith in. And that's obviously incredible for us because firstly, it means that we've got 10 years. So we can try out a lot more. We can have like a longer term approach to financial sustainability. We can reach way more people, and we've just got, you know, the name of the council, as well as they're also supported by the GLA. So these are really big names for us to tout, and it makes it a lot easier when we're trying to get recognition. So again, thinking of kind of top tips, I would definitely say that trying to work in collaboration with your local council or with somebody like the GLA or the council for whichever city you're based in is incredibly powerful. It also means that we now have a greater emphasis on supporting local people rather than just digital co-ops. So we started out with very much a community of interest, and we've broadened it or kind of refocused it to focus more on a locality, although we're still very much in touch with our kind of radical technology roots. And also last summer we took on Maddie, so she works part-time, and that's again like a huge turning point. It meant that we could free up a lot more time, and Maddie's the one who's like behind all of our amazing social media, so it just meant that we could broaden our reach beyond kind of my network and the people from Space 4. Before I move on to the next slide, I'm going to quickly check the chat, just in case anyone's got a pressing question. Dun, dun, dun. No, good. I'm really bad at, I'm quite bad at multitasking, so I'll just stop in between every slide. So I'm going to, for the next sort of 20 minutes or so, I'm going to basically run through a few sort of areas that I think you can create impact in, and just talk a bit about how we're doing it. And again, kind of try and run through some top tips and talk about some of our aspirations. You know, I should just say, it should really go without saying, you know, I've been doing this for a while, but I don't have all the answers. I think there are many, many ways to run successful workspaces. And there are, you know, a whole plethora of successful examples. So I've chosen a few examples I like, but it is by no means any kind of exhaustive list. And if you'd like to argue it out, then I'll be very happy to. So yeah, local people. Obviously, I think all co-working spaces or all workspaces or all community-centered projects should really consider the impact that they're making on their neighborhood. The way that we've been doing this is, of course, trying to find like relevant local media outlets and social media outlets, and just stay in touch with them and let them know what we're doing. We've run some advertising in local newspapers, but also tried to get some interesting features. So we've tried to get a couple. We had our local MP. It helped that he was Jeremy Corbyn, obviously, so there's quite a lot of media press around him. But we've had our local councillor. We've had a few famous-ish people come along to our local local events, and that's been a real help in trying to attract local media, as well as like social media outlets, to let people know what you're doing. Every time that we have a workshop, Maddie's always like bombarding the council and anything local to let them know that it's going on, so that we're not just kind of operating in a vacuum. I think that's true of lots of industries, although I think that the tech industry in particular can be quite elitist, and some people can struggle to understand what we do, particularly when you go into the niche of kind of lefty political tech. It can become quite niche quite quickly. So just allowing local people to realise that they're welcome, that they can influence your programme, and that there's a place for them. It's not just closed doors. I should just say that we're not on the ground floor. We're on the second floor. So it's not like the kind of place where you could just sort of pop into. I think if you could get the kind of place where it was ground floor and people can walk by, that would be the ideal. You may have heard of the London Plan, which is a document which was created a few years back by the Mayor's Office, or the GLA, and it basically sets out priorities in terms of like the economic and social development of London. For those of you who aren't London based, I am pretty sure that since the Localism Act of 2011, I'm pretty sure that all cities or boroughs are meant to have this document. So if you can't access the London Plan, obviously you should make sure you look on your council's website. There should be something called a local plan, and that should tell you more about what your local council is looking for, the makeup of your local area, and what's lacking. And, you know, always, I think, thinking about what gaps you can fill. We spend quite a lot of time developing workshops for local people. So thinking about what local businesses might need, thinking about what young people might need. And we have a model which I'll talk a bit more about later, but we actually ask anybody who has a desk in our space, or anybody who uses the space for an event and can't pay, we ask them to contribute in kind. And so that means that we can provide a lot of workshops for free for local people without it really costing us much. And people do it in exchange for a subsidised spot in the workspace. So in terms of like what we want to do, I mean, there is loads that we want to do, but here's just a couple. So we're aware that there are lots of SMEs in our local area who are struggling financially, and we think that they could be supported and they could be helped by improving their digital skills. So whether that's, say, online marketing or improving their processes. We also think that a lot of them could benefit probably from learning a bit more about cooperative principles, learning a bit about non-hierarchical structures to their companies, that kind of thing. Now, we think that, but we don't have any evidence to actually prove it. And so we have run quite a lot of workshops. Some of them have been more popular than others, and we've got a bit of data about that. But one of our next steps is to actually start collecting quite substantially more data, so that we can really tailor our program to local people. And yeah, like I say, we're in the process of doing that, as well as applying for some more funding to specifically target. Mainly it's going to be shops on our road. Some of you will already know because you've been to the space, but there's a lot of independent fashion shops on our road, many of whom are maybe like somewhat out of date when it comes to thinking about like the competition with high streets, or when it comes to thinking about online marketing. So we're going to run a sort of hyper local business accelerator in a way. Okay, another area where you need to think about making impact, or where at least we think we make impact, is thinking about our workspace community. So this is people who, from us, they buy desks. For other people, it might be, say, studio space or whatever. Create a nice atmosphere. Obviously, that goes without saying. Hopefully, we manage to do it, more or less. I mean, I think it's not a rocket science, creating a nice atmosphere, and I think that all sorts of co-working spaces do it in different ways. We just started by having lunch. It's really simple, but then some people say to me, "Oh, it's such a good idea," and I'm like, "Did you never think about that?" So every Wednesday, we ask everyone to chip in £5 if they can, and we get lunch usually from a local takeaway. And we bring it back, and it just gives people an opportunity to get to know each other quite informally. We have done some more formal sessions where people introduce themselves and talk about projects that they're working on and ways that they need help. But as the community has grown bigger and bigger, we've tended towards just making them really informal, so that people don't feel that they have to present. Allow members to take ownership. So every month or so, we have a session where everybody from the space is invited to talk about how they would like the space to be, because it's all very well Maddie and I or other people from Outlandish saying how we'd like it to be, but really, we're building it for them. And so we run sessions which are very open for everybody. We encourage everyone to come along. And we are hoping as time goes on to give more and more ownership to the people who use the space, which may end up in like a change of company structure. Now, I think this is the key one: generating income or improving skills for local residents. And I think that, there are definitely other organisations who do this, but this is something where I really, really want Space4 to kind of be a step ahead. So, for any of you who know about cooperatives, one of our principles is about collaboration rather than competition, and we try to bring this into Space4 as well. So we have a few different ways of trying to create opportunities for people to collaborate. So one is that any inquiries that I might get through Outlandish, which aren't appropriate for Outlandish or one of the other co-ops that we work specifically with, we broaden those out and invite people from Space4 to take them on. We also try, insofar as possible, when people have, say, like a vacancy in their team or a project that they don't have all the skills for, we have an internal mailing list which allows people to say, "Hey, I'm looking for a graphic designer," and that's been pretty successful and something that we're trying to develop much more for the future. We run tons of events, so I speak quite regularly to people within the space about what it is that they're trying to sell, or what kind of people they'd like to meet, and then we try to run events where they get to speak about their work, or they at least get to kind of meet people that they'd like to network with. And then we're running agony aunt sessions for co-ops, which is what we've kind of nicknamed them. It's basically co-ops who are just wanting to understand better how each other work. We just get into a room twice a month and just kind of have a bit of I don't think actually anyone's cried yet, but it's all out kind of chats about how to do things, and that helps us share work amongst ourselves as well, because we understand each other's processes and prices much better. And yeah, generally like a skills audit. So at the moment we have a spreadsheet which tells us what skills people have who are within the space. But our plan is to create a much more sophisticated technology solution, not just a spreadsheet in future. This was just a bit of inspiration. So I came across ATOLYE a couple of years ago at a conference. They are based in Istanbul. And they've got a really cool, I don't think they are necessarily emphasizing social impact, but I think that they've got this really cool project, which is that they map. So if you look at this, everyone who is in gray, that's their names, and they are tied to each other. Everything in red is a commercial project that they've worked on. And as I understand it, this organization, the more you collaborate with other people in their network, the less you actually pay for your desk. And I believe that they maybe take a small percentage. And ever since I saw this, I just thought it was a really nice example of ways that you can kind of encourage and measure the amount of kind of commercial work that you're creating for your community. And of course, you don't have to create all of that work. I suppose, you know, the biggest power comes from the peer-to-peer creation, because there's only so much that Maddie and I can really do in terms of creating work. You have to try and create an environment where that peer-to-peer learning or peer-to-peer exchange of actual sort of resources and work is facilitated. Yeah, ambition. So in fact, this week, I'm pretty proud to say that we are working on a project with one of the other co-ops. It's only a few £1,000s, but that's for the council. And we're trying to improve our branding, and just, we're going to be changing our website soon, so people get an understanding that we're not just a co-working space, but we're actually a community of people who have like all sorts of amazing tech skills. And if you've got a project where you need, you know, a designer, a developer and a strategist, then we can find them for you and we can build a bespoke team. So we're hoping to just get a lot better than that at that. We want to be attracting much bigger projects. And I think that is, yeah, I think that that's really what's very powerful and kind of, I suppose, I would say, I think makes us stand out from some of the more commercial co-working spaces. I'm not saying that we're the only people who prioritize this or who do it, but I think it's probably what makes us a bit different from sort of WeWork, where you just go and buy a desk and that's it. Okay, so another group that I suppose you probably want to impact is your local council. And I touched on this before. You know, we, as I've mentioned, we work very closely with Islington. But we wouldn't have got this 10-year contract if we hadn't been able to understand their social and economic priorities, and sort of how we can help meet them. So, you know, we can only work in the digital sector. That's what we do, and we can only really talk about, you know, co-ops and ethical co-ops. So it's, you know, I think, you know, put as the last bullet point, don't overpromise. I would say that it's silly to promise all things to all people, because you're probably going to set yourself up for a massive headache. But just think about what skills it is that you do have and the community of interest that you do have at your fingertips, and what you can do when you're going through that local plan or when you're doing surveys with your local community. And yeah, like I said, you know, so we're now at the moment developing some videos for the local council, which are going to be aimed at local SMEs. And so, you know, it's like a way that we can deliver a service on behalf of the local council in partnership with them, and help them to measure their impact on activities, which brings me nicely onto this slide. Woo! Okay, so this is Islington Council's social value matrix. They gave me permission to show you. I learned a lot about it at the time, but I actually think it is a really interesting piece of work. So this is a spreadsheet that we had to fill out in order to get this 10-year contract. So the top bit is like the whole spreadsheet. I just wanted to put it in there to show you how big it is. The bottom bit is just an excerpt. This basically, it's quite innovative. I mean, a spreadsheet is not exactly the best way to display it, but the actual concept behind it is, I think, quite interesting. So they've got various lines in there which talk about their priorities, which I believe are taken from their local plan. So they've got various demographics that they're trying to reach out to. So BAME communities, people who are long-term unemployed, young people, that kind of thing. And then what we were asked to do was estimate the number of hours that we could spend working with each of these groups in various different ways. So this one that I've shown is expert business advice. So that's basically how we do running workshops to support businesses, and I think running workshops to help people with their CVs and that kind of thing. And Islington, I'm not 100% sure how they calculated the figures, but they are saying that every hour of provision of expert business advice to a VCSE or SME is worth £116.72. So we then went through and worked out, this is, I think, these numbers are estimated over 5 years. And they are estimated between us and founders and coders. So it's not just what Space4 or Outlandish can do. So the number in there for IT management is particularly high because that's basically everything that founders and coders do. I think, like, in some ways, this sort of mega spreadsheet is a bit unwieldy, but ultimately being able to understand where your priorities are, how they fit in with your local council or local community, and being able to quantify them is really useful. I mean, never underestimate the power of qualitative analysis as well, but having something quantitative to fall back on is really useful. Yeah, so our ambition is to get really good at measuring our social impact. So I noticed that Tom from Time to Spare is here. So Time to Spare is a really amazing tool which has been developed mainly with community organisations in mind, so that they can measure the impact and funders can understand how impactful their funding is across the board. Tom and Will, who are a fantastic pair who are based in our co-working space, have let us use this. So we're actually only just, to be honest, I wanted to get it all ready to show you, but I didn't get around to it. And anyway, we're not in the space at the moment, so there's not much that we can measure. But it's a really lovely piece of equipment, like a really lovely tool, and I would highly recommend it to anybody who wants to understand more about how to measure their social value. And then this is another ambition, and I actually don't really know, like, the answer to this. And in fact, if anyone wants to discuss it at the end, I'd be really interested. So embody a viable alternative to CSR. Now, there are a lot of co-working spaces or training spaces which are run by people like Google or Samsung, who are doing amazing things. So like Google Campus, you can basically get like free desk space. If you're a tech startup, they have loads of stuff all about like women and diversity. They have all sorts of free workshops. They actually do like some really, really impressive stuff. And I would say that Google are maybe less evil than some companies, but ultimately they are mega evil. And I think in the co-working sector, there's quite a lot of debate about what makes a good co-working space. And I would probably argue that Samsung and Google probably don't add, although they probably can achieve more than us in many ways in terms of the volume of free events that they can do. I would say that there's a place for them in every large city, but it's really important for us to, as independent workspace operators, to be able to communicate the value that we deliver beyond that, and that, you know, we are going to be paying taxes. We have got like a friendly face, you know, we're like a very small organization rather than like a big faceless megacorp. Anyway, I actually don't know how to communicate this perfectly, like particularly well, but if anyone's got any ideas, please send them on a postcard. Okay, so financial sustainability, obviously it's all very well being incredibly socially impactful, but how can you make it? It's not going to be worth much if you go bust. So like I mentioned a few slides ago, we massively utilize our community to be able to deliver free things. We're an affordable workspace, which is defined as like less than 80% of market rate. But we actually go beyond that, and we have a pay what you can scheme. Sorry, I haven't had a sip of tea this whole time. So we have a pay what you can scheme, and I think that has been incredibly powerful. People are sometimes really shocked when I tell them about our pay what you can scheme, because they think, well, how can you make ends meet? And some people, I think, you know, it's important to remember that some people pay more, excuse me, pay more than what we ask them for, which is just, you know, it's really amazing. It's just really nice for me to hear that they actually value it, you know, highly. We've actually got almost everybody's paying 50% or more during the time that it's closed, which I think is kind of testament to how this has actually worked. You know, it's not specifically a transactional relationship. It's like, it's a community. And again, I think that helps with this this thing that I mentioned a couple of slides ago about allowing your community to take ownership, and just communicating to them that, you know, if we don't club together and all try and make it work financially, we'll all be bust pretty soon. And we've had various other co-ops or other organisations sponsor us. Thanks, Finn. I saw you were here. So Finn sponsored us with their co-op Agile Collective, even though they're not based in London and barely ever use the space. Oh, and I said, don't ask too much. I think I've been in meetings with other co-working operators who seem to be getting quite angry that not all of their people were delivering workshops. I think it's, you know, you can't apply one rule to everybody. Some people find that like incredibly stressful and would hate to deliver a workshop, or, you know, and I think it's about trying to empower them rather than trying to force people to do it. Developing partnerships with people who've already got your network. So, you know, we've got a great network when it comes to tech co-ops, but we don't necessarily have a great network when it comes to, say, like diversity and entrepreneurialism. So we're now developing a partnership with Foundervine, who are sort of entrepreneurial startup people, and they don't necessarily, they've got I think they share our values, but they're not so plugged into the kind of more like radical politics side of things, which we can help them with, and they can help us more with having a program which is already set up and running, and having a completely different network to us, so we're kind of benefiting each other. And yeah, anybody who's trying to run a space purely off the income of renting out desks, I would say just try not to do that, because it's really difficult. It's really, really difficult. We found, like, we thought it would be much easier. Particularly, I mean, it's probably fine if you've got loads of like millionaire friends and people who are going to come and work in your workspace and they don't care how much they spend, but it's really limited, because unless you've got like a massive space, your income is always going to be quite limited. So of course we try to diversify our income by running events or like meeting rooms and that kind of thing, but we're also trying to think of like other types of funding. So I mentioned that we're trying to develop more work leads for people, and again, that's something that I would quite like to develop more of, so that we could potentially, once they become big enough, take a percentage.
Create something.
Is somebody wanting to say something? Oh, no. Yeah, funding. I mean, we haven't been that successful on getting any kind of charitable funding. That is partly down to the fact that we're a worker co-op, and there are lots of funds who kind of don't fund worker co-ops for one reason or another. It's not something that we're going to give up on, but we're definitely, it's something that, you know, it takes up quite a lot of time and then sometimes doesn't lead to any payback. Yeah, like I say, we're not giving up. But workspaces, from what I've gathered, seem to be judged more as commercial businesses. And I think that a lot of funders don't understand the social value that they bring. And so unless you're already set up as a charity, that it can be a bit tricky. We're actually considering, as like a long-term plan, thinking about restructuring and potentially breaking off from Outlandish. It's not in the offing right away, but it would potentially mean that we'd be more eligible for certain types of fund which are aimed at, say, CICs or community.
Create though.
INDYCUBE, I think, is a really inspirational organisation. They were set up in Wales initially, so they're a network of freelancers. They're not industry specific, so they've got everything from jewelers to you know, web developers. I think what INDYCUBE is trying to do is really amazing, and it's something that we would like to get further on. They're basically trying to act as almost like a freelancers union. So they provide people with legal advice, invoice factoring. Obviously, being a union is quite tricky when it comes to thinking about freelancers and thinking across a variety of industries. But they're definitely trying to talk a lot to the government about what a freelancers union might be, and really advocate for their members on like a legal basis. And yeah, I think that is something that we would really like to do. To be honest, this should probably have been where the ATOLYE network was, and I should have swapped them around, but you get the idea really. It's like a way that you can provide more than just a desk to your to your members. It's not just about a desk that they come and use 3 days a week. It's about some extra value that you're providing them. I think I've covered this really. So yeah, you know, we're trying to be more like a place which is kind of working as an agent for all of our members, rather than just a workspace provider. We're also trying to think of better ways that we can support people who are outside of London and who don't necessarily come to our physical space. Obviously, like actually, in fact, you know, that's one of the silver linings of COVID, is that we are trying to have a lot more webinars, and it has been really inspirational to see that people have been like attending from all over the country, which is allowing us to expand our network and sort of again expand our like social impact. We are redoing our website, and we're hoping to have all the recordings of all of these on our website, so that people can kind of watch them again and again, and we can be like a place for people to go for like tech tutorials or co-op tutorials, that kind of thing. Right, this basically brings me, oh, what time is it? Oh, 20 minutes to go. Okay, so there is like, I started making a list of all the things that I would like to talk to people about. Some are sexier than others, but I am about to go to the like part which is like, who's got a question? But this is 2 slides actually just kind of talking about like the types of things that I have a bit of experience in. I'm not saying I'm an expert in all of them, but so this is, I'll just read out the top one. So how to look for a building, or what to look for in a building, stakeholder engagement when you're looking for that building. So that's things about like the councils in the local area. How to fund it or make it sustainable, how to engage your stakeholders like once you're in the building, so the people who are really like using your building. And then yeah, admin and finance, not that exciting, but very, very important. Fit out and refurb, like what the kind of costs and all the things that you might have to consider, because yeah, like the first time I did a refurbishment, my God, there were so many things that you had to think about, and I'm still learning so much. How to kind of promote your work and how to make your work matter and impactful. So those are things that occur to me, and like if you were to go into a much more detailed understanding of how to set up a co-working space, or any, you know, I'm using the word co-working space, it could be all sorts of sort of physical work space type things. But yes, questions, that's it. You can try and ask me anything, I'll see if I can answer. Or feedback, or, you know, reflections.
I think there's a question on the group.
Okay.
Have you explored subscribing to digital tools as Space 4 and using hot desking license management to 1, make things more affordable to tenants, to earn money? Let's see if I understand. So you're referring to hot desking in general to make things more affordable. So we do hot desking. So we try to be very flexible in what we're offering. So, you know, if there's particular hours, you can't.
You talk about.
Yeah?
Oh, right, okay. No.
Well, yes. This crops up with a lot.
Actually, Maddie and I were kind of discussing this earlier, like what extra benefits we could give, and I think INDYCUBE does this kind of thing, in that they have this kind of invoice factoring service that they offer all of their members. And I think that is more or less a digital tool. And I think that, yeah, it's not something that we've done, mainly I think because we've been working on like very small margins to date. But I think in the long term it would be really useful. Because yeah, obviously for freelancers, getting something like an Adobe license is kind of out of a lot of people's reach when they're just starting out. Whereas as an organisation, we could really do that.
It means that you'd end up with them swallowing most of your profit.
And a suitable building.
Who was that? What was that?
That was me, Billy. It means that if you're running a subscription, if you're having to fulfill an Adobe subscription when you're running doing stuff that's freelance, you're basically having you're basically giving away a large chunk of your profit margin to someone else.
Yeah, but maybe it doesn't matter. Maybe as long as, you know, as long as enough people in your workspace value it, maybe it doesn't matter that you're not making that much profit.
Yeah, but sorry, it used to be that you could buy an Adobe product outright and then you'd own it for life and you could use it for life, which was good. It was great, but the subscription services, unless you've got the shared licensing so that someone else is using it when you're not, it's a lot of them, it's a major expense that you don't necessarily need, man.
Yeah, but I really like that idea, so I think we should.
Oh, no, it's great.
The next question was from Thomas, which is actually a question for Maddie, I think. What have you found works and doesn't work in terms of marketing?
Sorry, I can't see the chat anymore. So marketing, yes, what works? Well, most things work. Any kind of engagement is better than no engagement. But I guess what I would say is it's so broad, marketing. So what I've had to do is sort of really look at what areas and focus on those and actually just not try to do too much. Because whenever I've kind of gone on to many platforms, tried to engage with lots of people, it never hardly works that way. So I think that's what my advice is, to be very, very clear on your marketing plan. And also create lists of, especially in like Twitter and Instagram, of who you want to talk to regularly, because there's so much out there.
And I would say that, like, for me, physical, like actual events really, really help with marketing, or even, you know, these webinars. Because, you know, I think there's nothing more powerful really than like word of mouth and actual face-to-face relationship building. And I would say we have like a bit of a different community who comes to our events versus who use our workspace, because often by the end of the day, if you've been in the workspace all day, you don't always want to hang around for an event. But obviously everybody who comes to an event, they learn about the workspace, and we generally run our events for free, but because then people realize that we've got workspace to generate revenue. Mimi says, I wanted to ask you what you do to keep your tenants engaged. We do lunch every week. We generally have a fairly generous supply of beer hanging around the office. But no, on a more serious note, we do have these meetings once a month. We try to run them sociocratically, which means that everybody gets a chance to say something. So I think that we don't always do it perfectly, but I think everyone gets an opportunity to have their voice heard, which is really important. You don't just get drowned out by the loudest person. We write regular emails to them. We have an internal mailing list which they can all use as well. So rather than people having to come to, say, Maddie or I to say, oh, could you recommend an accountant or whatever, they can use that emailing list. So that breaks down barriers, helps people stay engaged. And in terms of like in the wake of COVID, I mean, yeah, Maddie, again, do you want to answer? Because it's lots of these things, really.
Sorry, yes. So I think obviously, like everyone else during COVID, we've had to go online a lot more with the workshop especially. But I think because we already had a good network of people, it hasn't been that difficult to talk to people. If anything, it's been a lot easier, I would say.
But yeah, our lunches, like,
yeah, exactly.
Have virtual lunch.
Yeah, so we've continued pretty much what we used to do. The only thing we're not doing is meeting face to face for now. But yeah, I think it's good.
Ovi says, could you share more about the journey of finding a suitable building and evaluating the cost to get it started? I certainly can. I mean, it's probably quite a long conversation. So Ovi, maybe it would be good for you to drop us an email But in terms of finding a suitable building, are you based in London? I need to find you on our chat. Where are you? Oh, you've got your things. Yes, okay. So obviously buildings are extremely expensive in London. We were very lucky in that. So I think there's a few ways to do it. So one, Meanwhile Space. Meanwhile Space is a very cool organisation. They were set up maybe 10 years ago or something. They started trying to find properties between them being bought and sold, and use them for kind of small businesses and studios and that kind of thing. And they still do that. But one of the most interesting things they did was work a lot with the government to create some legislation around people being able to legally take these buildings, because it used to be very tricky from a landlord's point of view. So looking into trying to take over a temporary space, I think is a really good way to start. So, you know, we started on quite a low cost building in the case of Space 4, but it may as well have been a Meanwhile Space because we only had it initially for a year. And that allows you to learn a lot and talk a bit more about and think a little bit more about what it is that you need. Then, so I would say, yeah, try to start small. In terms of, you know, I would, unless you happen to have a millionaire backer, I would try to get a building which is already pretty much fitted out. Like once you start thinking about electricians or any kind of plumbing, it is going to be like really, really expensive. We were looking at a building previously to the one that we got, which wasn't, we would have had to fit out all of the electricity and all of the, any kind of, you know, broadband and things. And we got a rough estimate and they said it would be about £50,000 to £60,000. And that was over 2 floors. It was 2 floors, I think it was about 500 square meters. So that's not even like that. It's quite a big building. It's bigger than the one we've got, but like £60,000, that's like a lot of money, and like that's just getting wiring in. So yeah, you need to have to think about like the initial fit out costs. And then I think that you should probably almost always factor, unless you're moving from one space to another, you should always factor in some downtime. So like I said, we spent the first 9 months running at like a loss. I kind of don't like saying loss because it sounds very negative, but not making as much money as we were spending. And so yeah, so I think bear that in mind as well. But yeah, Ovi, I'm very happy to chat to you more about like other costs.
Instead of saying loss, say deficit.
A deficit, that's the one. Thanks, Billy. Then we've got Dill, are you talking about multi-stakeholder structure stuff? Yes, but it's such a massive, it's really big, all of that stuff. And every time I look at it, I get overwhelmed and think, oh God, I'll just look at this tomorrow. But Dill, actually, I've been thinking you'd be a good person to speak to about that. So I think eventually we probably would like Space 4 to become a multi-stakeholder co-op, so that Outlandish became a member of Space 4, rather than Space 4 being like a subsidiary of Outlandish, and that all of the people who use the space, and people like, say, for example, Finn, whose co-op has sponsored the space but doesn't really use it, could also be kind of legal stakeholders in the business. So that would be something like a multi-stakeholder co-op or something. But yeah, it's tricky thinking about all that stuff. I'll put it off again for tomorrow. Yasmin, an ethical standard for co-working space leasing practice. Sorry, I'm just reading your question. I think this is really tricky. So I don't know, has everyone got the chat up? The question is there an ethical standard for co-working space leasing practice? Often trusts and companies that use tax havens will own land and buildings as investments in London that they can lease out to charities and social good causes. You can look at the land registry, but that sometimes obfuscates the real owners. Do you know if organisations like Meanwhile Space take this into account? I don't know about Meanwhile Space. I know that the GLA is doing quite a big piece of work, which is currently in pilot, to do something called an ethical workspace accreditation scheme. I'm hoping that we will get involved with that, because I think, again, it goes back to that question I was talking about, or is Google Campus, does that count as an ethical workspace? And as far as I know, they are the first people in the UK to start putting this together, because I think you're completely right. There is a lot of dodgy stuff when it comes to property, particularly in London or other capital cities. And there is a lot of, in fact, Ugly Duck, which I mentioned I used to work at, was originally owned by a independent landlord. And the building got sold to a big kind of property investor, which we couldn't really do much about. Well, we definitely couldn't do anything about it. We could have refused to work with them, but we would have then kind of lost most of our business. And it's a really tricky ethical question. That is, you know, I think it depends a bit. So as far as I know, there is no leasing practice that I know of, Yasmin. So that's the short answer. I think there's definitely an opportunity to build one. I think that we really need one, because I'm, you know, sick to death of like hearing about property speculation and the amount that people like WeWork are contributing to that. And there's also, and I think there's a grey area where, you know, there are lots of people who want buildings, and there are lots of companies who could do with putting something vaguely ethical or arty or whatever onto their like end of year brochure for their investors, and they can say, oh look, we gave this central London building to a social good cause or an artist or whatever, and you know, doesn't that make us look good? And I think that, you know, you have to kind of work out where you stand on that. It can be kind of gross, but at the same time, if it is meaning that buildings aren't sitting there empty, and it is meaning that, you know, artists or charities or whoever are meeting their needs, maybe it's a good thing. I don't really know. But yeah, as far as I know, there isn't so far an ethical workspace. But in fact, Bernie is here in the chat, and Bernie is a really good person to chat to about that. And yeah, if you go to, so London Co-working Assembly is a network of independent co-working operators, and like there's loads of really amazing people there, and I think we're all trying to work towards getting something which recognizes people's ethics, going beyond just like, oh yeah, we give free workshops to women, something which goes a little bit deeper and says, and we're also owned by our workers, and we don't have dodgy tax, and we don't speculate on property. I think that it can only really be ethical once it starts answering those questions. That's all the questions, I think. Have I missed any? How do you manage your payment in kind? So payment in kind, so we almost always ask, so we have a list of tasks that we ask people that we always need. So we almost always need people to come to events. We need people, we use, in fact, to be honest, I used to do more of this before Maddie joined. Like I always needed help with marketing and that kind of thing. And so I would usually kind of think of a bunch of, or, you know, things like, can you go 1 week to like sort out the lunch? Because otherwise that takes me like a good kind of hour or two. So we thought of a bunch of tasks that we needed doing, and that helps, I think, get people's imaginations going. And then we also, when people start using the space, we ask them what kind of skills they have, and whether we could like use some of their skills. So we were doing some kind of like marketing masterclasses with somebody who does more like, yeah, it's like marketing but kind of audience strategy stuff. And so we give him a bit of, we give him some money off his bill. But one thing which I think is like a really small but kind of important tip is that when we invoice people, we invoice them for the full amount, and then we have a line on it which is like discounted 50%. And it's kind of small, and maybe people would say that that's arbitrary, but it does mean that people are reminded that it's not just for free that you're giving this away, and it is actually like they've got an obligation to provide something to you. And yeah, so I think, so we do that. I mean, I think it is important to try and think of what their skills are, because if you tell somebody who's never been near Twitter that you need them to do an hour on social media, they'll probably run a mile. But yeah, I don't know, does that answer your question, Reg? Yeah. Anyone else? Yeah, has anyone else got any comments? Are any of you like workspace operators who have got some good pearls of wisdom for us?
What do you think you could create?
what do I think we could create?
Yes.
So I think like my ambition is to kind of work more closely with INDYCUBE. I think actually it's been really interesting, this whole COVID thing, realizing that there isn't really a voice for freelancers out there, and the government was pretty slow to announce its support for freelancers, and even when it came, I think a hell of a lot of people have fallen through the gaps. So anybody, you know, you could have been working for 10 years and you decided to go freelance last year and you're screwed now. I think that freelancers, I think you often hear the expression lifestyle business. And I would argue that in most of the cases of freelancers that I've known, it's not a lifestyle choice, or it's not like something that you do as a bit of fun. People are working really, really hard, and you know, and with the people that I know working on like really incredibly social value projects, and often working for like not a huge amount of money. And I think that those people really need a voice. So I would like to create, I would like Space4 to become more like a kind of union type thing for freelancers. I think I can only really talk so really about like the tech industry. There's an interesting organisation in Belgium that you might have heard of called Smart, who are effectively that you can invoice through. They're kind of like an umbrella company. So you get the protection of being a worker as if you were employed, but you have the flexibility of being a freelancer. The way that our tax laws work here in the UK means that something which is just like that would be pretty much impossible. But I think that as more and more people move into freelancing, that's going to be really important. I think, you know, we are moving away from like your traditional company structure, and that can create quite a lot of loneliness, basically, for want of a better word. You know, like if you're sitting at home all day working, some people like that. I think some people go a bit stir crazy. So trying to be something which is really like building a community for people so they're not feeling like alone in their work. There's another really interesting, slightly more radical organisation called Doc Servizi, who are based in Italy, who are a little bit like Smart, but a little bit more radical. They do a bit more lobbying of the government. So I think that is where I would like to be. I would like to be ideally we'd like to start potentially opening some more spaces, or if not, like at the moment we don't have like the financial, we don't have enough cash to like open more spaces, but we'd definitely like to see cooperative principles be delivered in more co-working spaces or more workspaces of one form or another. And we would really like to basically do more of these kinds of workshops, like working in collaboration with people who are already got workspaces, or councils who are thinking of like implementing some kind of workspace strategy. And yeah, just I'd like it to kind of, you know, start a network of organizations who are thinking about this kind of thing. Yeah, and more parties. We like parties when we can finally go back and be together again. Yeah, I think, yeah, you know, I think that the point that Adobe, that Dill made about Adobe is like a really valuable one, like not specific to Adobe as such, but having kind of special offers for your community, but not just like, oh, you get like 5p off your McDonald's hamburger, but like, in fact, I just noticed that Tom's here, who runs like an ethical broadband organization, and, you know, try to think about like, hey Tom, try to think about ways that we can source like really ethical services where we know that people are paying the right taxes and paying their workers correctly, and help guide our members into choosing some of their services, and ideally get like some money off in some way, form or other. Yeah, and I think, yeah, just more and more ways to give back to our local community. I'm just reading this. Yeah, Alia Business Centre in London Fields, they're really nice. They do lots of stuff with social enterprise, and they have various like accelerators and like meetups and things.
The reason I mentioned them, it's went along to one of them, and they were one of the few accelerators that were actually happy about cooperatives taking part. which was like, wow, this is cool.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, I think it's 5. Yeah, 1 minute past 5. So I think we'll call it a day because I'm sure that people have stuff to get on with. But yeah, Maddie, in fact, Maddie, have you got anything to add?
No, I just want to say thank you to everyone who joined. I just linked to our newsletter, but link didn't work out, but if you just copy and paste, you can sign up. And also our email address is on there, so just email us with any more questions that you've got and we'll answer. But also when we are open, we'd love for you guys to come see us.
Please. It's very unnatural for us to be doing all this, like, I think Maddie and I are both like such kind of people. It's very weird to be doing it on Zoom. But yeah, thank you for coming to my first ever webinar. I hope I didn't stutter too much. This is the first time I've ever felt slightly embarrassed looking at a computer, guys, so but yeah, thank you very much, everybody, and like, please stay in touch and yeah, join our newsletter, and yeah, if anyone wants to run an event when we're open again, let us know.
Yes, definitely.
We'll sit on the opposite side. Luckily we've got quite a nice big space now, so we can do a bit of social distancing, maybe. Great. And yeah, and that's if anyone wants more workshops, let me know. I want to do more workshops, so yeah, give me a shout.
Yeah,
lovely. All right, thank you very much, everybody.
Thanks, Polly. Thanks, Maddie.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye. Just gonna wait before I end it.
Did you record it, Maddie? Also, hey, Yas, we've never seen you for ages. Oh look, there's some. Oh, and Philip. Hey, Philip, you got a beard. True lockdown.
You like it, do you? Yeah. And very good.
Hey, have you been here the whole time, Philip?
From about 10 minutes in, I think. Yeah.
Oh, good. So you saw me give a little mention to INDYCUBE.
Lots of mentions, actually. Yeah. and smart and everything. That I thought it was really good. And I like the stuff about ATOLYE. Yeah. And that heat map of how people actually work together. I think that's really good.
Yeah, I think we need to get one of those. It's not that like they use Graph Commons. I started making one and everyone said, oh no, you have to make sure you're using an open source software, and tried to make me do something really complicated.
Yeah. Well, I think the stuff about like shared software licenses is an interesting one, but it doesn't have to be the space that does these things, but as long as it can empower people to do that together, can be as much, it doesn't have to, it needs to empower people as opposed to do everything, I think. And I thought the stuff about smart and things like that, I think that's good what you said.
Yeah, cool. Philip, I'll send you over my that thing I was talking to you about last week.
Okay, all right. Take care.
All right. Bye, everybody. Thanks you. And Ovi, we'll send the slides to you. Assuming we've got your email address, haven't we?
Yeah, me. Yeah.
No, Ovi. He's asking me on the chat if I can send him the slides. But yeah. All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye.